The huge metal station floated in space like a giant wheel spinning slowly around nothing. It was bigger than most moons and had lights that blinked in patterns across its dark surface. This was the Galaxy Council station where the most important decisions in the known universe were made. Ships from 12 different alien species came and went from the docking bays every day. Some looked like metal insects with too many legs. Others were smooth and round like giant pearls. All of them carried beings who had learned long ago that talking was better than fighting. Jake Morrison sat in a chair that was too big for him. The aliens had built everything to fit their own sizes, and humans were smaller than most of them. The chair was made from some kind of blue metal that felt cold even through his uniform. Around him, the council chamber stretched up so high that the ceiling disappeared into shadows. 12 massive seats were arranged in a circle, and each one held a different kind of alien creature. The biggest seat belonged to Chairman Veltar, who looked like a giant praying mantis made of dark green chitin. His compound eyes reflected the light from dozens of angles as he stared down at Jake. Next to him sat the Sorok delegate, whose scales shifted color from red to orange. When he was thinking, the crystalline Zephyrian made musical sounds that somehow everyone could understand as words. There were others too, but Jake had stopped trying to remember all their names years ago. Jake had been Earth's ambassador to the Galaxy Council for 3 years now. In that time, he had sat through hundreds of meetings where aliens talked about trade routes and mining rights and territorial disputes. Most of the time, they ignored him completely. Humans were new to the galaxy, and everyone knew new species had to wait their turn to speak. Today was different, though. Today, they were finally ready to offer humanity a place at the table. Chairman Veltar's voice buzzed like static electricity when he spoke. The translation device in Jake's ear turned the alien sounds into English words that felt flat and emotionless. Human Morrison, we have reached our decision about your species. The Galaxy Council is prepared to offer Earth membership under the standard terms for new civilizations. Jake nodded politely and waited for the rest. He knew there would be conditions. There were always conditions when the Council offered something. Your species will be granted junior status for a probationary period of 1,000 Earth years. During this time, you will demonstrate your commitment to galactic peace by dismantling all military vessels and surrendering weapons of mass destruction to Council oversight. You will accept Council advisors who will guide your expansion into no more than 5 additional star systems. In return, you will receive protection from hostile forces and access to established trade networks. The other council members made sounds of approval. The Sorok hissed softly, which Jake had learned meant agreement. The Zephyrian chimed in harmony with 2 other crystalline beings. Even the slug-like gastropods pulsed their skin in patterns. That showed satisfaction. Jake listened to more details about tribute payments and technology sharing agreements. Humanity would provide raw materials from their solar system and share their scientific research with council scientists. They would accept limits on their population growth and submit to regular inspections to ensure compliance. The terms went on for almost an hour. When Chairman Veltar finally finished speaking, the chamber fell quiet except for the soft humming of air recyclers. All 24 alien eyes were focused on Jake, waiting for his response. This was the moment every species in the galaxy had experienced when they first encountered the Council. The moment when they chose civilization over barbarism. Jake stood up slowly. His human legs felt strange after sitting still for so long. He looked around the circle of alien faces and saw the same expression on all of them. They expected him to bow his head and accept their generous offer. Every species for 10,000 years had done exactly that. No, Jake said quietly. The word seemed to echo in the huge chamber, even though that was impossible. Chairman Veltar's compound eyes narrowed and he leaned forward in his massive chair. Perhaps the translation was unclear. We are offering your species membership in the galactic community. I heard you correctly, Jake replied. The answer is no. Now there were sounds from the other council members. Worried chittering from the insect-like beings. Discordant notes from the Zephyrians. The Sorok delegate's scales turned deep red, which Jake knew meant anger or confusion. You refuse council protection? Chairman Veltar's voice had changed somehow. It sounded sharper now, like metal scraping against stone. Without our guidance, your species will face the hostile elements of space alone. There are pirate fleets that prey on unprotected worlds, rogue artificial intelligences that consume entire star systems, ancient weapons left over from wars your primitive minds cannot imagine. Jake nodded calmly. We understand the risks. Then perhaps you do not understand the benefits we offer. Trade networks that span thousands of worlds. Scientific knowledge accumulated over millennia. Cultural exchange that will advance your civilization by centuries in mere decades. We understand those benefits too, Jake said. Our answer remains. No, the council chamber erupted in alien voices all talking at once. Some sounded angry while others seemed confused or frightened. Jake had never heard them argue before. In all his years attending their meetings, everything had always been decided through calm discussion and unanimous votes. Chairman Veltar raised one of his blade-like arms, and the noise stopped immediately. Human Morrison, your species is young, and perhaps does not comprehend the consequences of this decision. We will grant you time to reconsider. Return to your homeworld and discuss this matter with your leaders. When you are ready to accept our terms, you need only send word. Jake shook his head. There's nothing to discuss. Humanity rejects your offer and any future offers like it. We choose to remain independent. Independent? Chairman Valtar repeated the word like it tasted bad. No species can survive independently in this galaxy. The universe is too dangerous and too complex for any single world to manage alone. Maybe, Jake admitted. But we're willing to find out. The silence that followed was different from before. This wasn't the pause of beings thinking about what to say next. This was the silence of creatures who had just heard something impossible. Jake could feel their confusion and growing alarm even though their faces were alien to him. We have been preparing for this possibility since the day we met you, Jake added softly. Those words hit the council like a physical blow. Several of the alien delegates made sounds of disbelief. Others sat perfectly still as if they were statues. Chairman Veltar's compound eyes reflected the chamber lights as he stared at the small human standing before them. Jake Morrison had just done something no species had done in 10,000 years of galactic history. He had looked at the most powerful organization in the known universe and told them no. The implications of that simple word would ripple across the galaxy in ways none of them could yet imagine. 3 months had passed since Jake Morrison spoke his impossible word to the Galaxy Council. In those 3 months, the Council's intelligence networks had been working day and night to understand what humanity was really planning. What they discovered made every member species question everything they thought they knew about the small blue world called Earth. Analyst Crixlon sat in his underwater office, reviewing data streams that flowed across holographic displays like schools of luminous fish. His amphibian skin changed color from green to deep blue as he processed the disturbing information his agents had gathered. Crixlon had served the Council for over 2 centuries and prided himself on never making mistakes. The data in front of him suggested he had made the biggest mistake of his very long life. The Council had assumed humanity was confined to their single star system with perhaps a few primitive colonies on nearby worlds. The truth was far more complex and frightening. While maintaining diplomatic contact with the Council, humanity had been secretly launching massive colony ships to distant star systems. Not just 1 or 2 ships, but hundreds of them carrying millions of humans to worlds the Council didn't even know existed. The colony ships had been launched over 300 years ago, long before humanity achieved faster-than-light travel. They were massive vessels designed to carry entire populations on journeys that would take generations to complete. While the Council was making first contact with Earth, these ships had already been arriving at their destinations and establishing hidden human colonies across the galaxy. Admiral Lisa Carter commanded the human vessel NZ Defiance from a bridge that looked nothing like the peaceful exploration ships the Council was familiar with. Every surface was covered with weapons controls and tactical displays. The crew moved with military precision that spoke of years of combat training. When she broadcast her message to Council listening posts, her words were calm but filled with deadly promise. My name is Admiral Lisa Carter, and I speak for the United Nations Space Command. For 50 years we have watched your council and learned your ways. We know the strength and weakness of every member species. We understand your political structures and your trade dependencies. Most importantly, we know that your peace has made you soft. The recordings sent shock waves through Council intelligence offices across the galaxy. Not only did humanity have a secret military organization, but they had been studying the Council like scientists examining specimens in a laboratory. Every diplomatic meeting and cultural exchange had been an opportunity for human spies to gather information about alien capabilities and psychology. Dr. Ryan Walsh had spent 30 years studying alien biology and behavior patterns. His research labs were hidden on remote human colonies where Council observers would never think to look. The scientific papers he released through encrypted channels contained detailed analyses of how each alien species thought and fought and feared. He knew which pheromones could drive Sorok warriors into uncontrollable rage. He understood how to disrupt Zephyrian harmonic communication networks. He had mapped the social hierarchies that kept every Council species functioning. The most terrifying revelation came when Captain Emma Rodriguez engaged a Council patrol fleet near the Centauri system. The 3 Council ships were modern vessels equipped with the latest defensive technologies and crewed by experienced peacekeepers. They expected to easily capture or destroy the single human ship that had appeared on their sensors. The battle lasted 12 minutes and 17 seconds. When it was over, all 3 Council ships were drifting, hulks leaking atmosphere and debris into space. The human vessel had sustained minor damage to its forward armor, but was otherwise completely functional. Captain Rodriguez broadcast her after-action report on open channels, so every intelligence service in the galaxy could hear her words. Council forces rely too heavily on defensive systems and intimidation tactics. Their weapons are designed to disable rather than destroy. Their ship designs prioritize comfort over combat effectiveness. Most importantly, their crews have never experienced real warfare. They hesitate when they should attack and retreat when they should advance. The analysis was clinically precise and absolutely devastating. In 12 minutes, a single human captain had demonstrated that 50 years of Council military superiority was an illusion. Their peacekeeping fleets were not prepared for opponents who actually wanted to fight, but the most chilling message came from Commander Alex Thompson, who broadcast from the bridge of a massive human battleship that had appeared in the Outer Rim territories. The ship was 3 times larger than anything in the Council fleet and bristled with weapon systems that looked both familiar and terrifyingly advanced. We have been preparing for this war since before we achieved interstellar flight. When our first radio telescopes detected alien signals, we knew we would eventually encounter other species. We assumed any galactic civilization would attempt to conquer or control us. So we spent centuries developing weapons and strategies specifically designed to fight a technologically superior enemy. The implications hit Council analysts like a physical blow. Humanity hadn't stumbled into conflict with the Council through misunderstanding or accident. They had been planning for galactic war for over 500 years. Every human technological advancement had been guided by military necessity. Every colony ship carried not just settlers, but weapons and industrial facilities designed to support a war effort, while Council species had spent millennia perfecting art and philosophy and peaceful coexistence. Humanity had been perfecting the science of destruction. They had studied every historical conflict in their species' violent past and learned from each one. They understood logistics and supply lines and the psychology of combat in ways the Council had forgotten centuries ago. The hidden human colonies weren't just settlements but fortress worlds equipped with weapons that could destroy entire fleets. The generation ships that had seemed like desperate attempts to spread their species were actually strategic deployments of military assets across the galaxy. Humanity had spent 3 centuries building the infrastructure needed to fight, and Win a galactic war. Crixlon's final report to the Council painted a picture that none of them wanted to believe. The small primitive species they had dismissed as barely worthy of junior membership was actually the most dangerous military force the galaxy had seen in over 10,000 years. They had not just rejected Council authority but had been preparing to destroy it since the day they learned of its existence. The Council chamber fell silent as Crixlon finished reading his analysis. Chairman Veltar's compound eyes reflected the display screens showing human fleet positions throughout the galaxy. Red dots marked confirmed human colonies while yellow indicators showed probable locations of hidden bases. There were hundreds of them scattered across sectors the Council thought were empty space. "How many ships do they have?" asked the Sorak delegate whose scales had turned pale with shock. "Unknown," Crixlon replied honestly. "But based on industrial capacity estimates and observed fleet movements, we believe they can field at least 10,000 combat vessels, possibly many more." The number hung in the air like a death sentence. The entire Council peacekeeping fleet numbered less than 3,000 ships, most of which were designed for patrol duties rather than actual combat. Against a human force that had been built from the ground up for warfare, they would be hopelessly outmatched. "What do they want?" whispered the crystalline Zephyrian, whose harmonic voice sounded discordant with fear. The answer came in Jake Morrison's final transmission to the Council. His image appeared on screens throughout the station, looking exactly as calm and polite as he had 3 months earlier, but now his words carried the weight of an entire species' determination. "The Galaxy Council will dissolve itself and withdraw from all member worlds. Any attempt to maintain your authority through force will be met with total war. You have 7 days to comply." The ultimatum was delivered in the same quiet tone Jake had used to refuse their original offer. But this time every Council member understood they were hearing not a diplomatic rejection, but a declaration of war from the species that had been preparing for this moment for centuries. The Galaxy Council's response to humanity's ultimatum was swift and predictable. They would not surrender 10,000 years of galactic authority to a species they still considered primitive upstarts. Chairman Veltar issued mobilization orders to every member world and declared humanity an enemy of galactic peace. Within days, the largest military fleet in recorded history began assembling at strategic points throughout Council space. The fleet was impressive by any measure, over 2,000 ships representing 12 different species and their unique approaches to warfare. Sorak vessels looked like metal predators with weapons that could tear through asteroid fields. Zephyrian crystal ships hummed with harmonic weapons that could shatter molecular bonds. The massive Veltaran carriers disgorged clouds of smaller fighters like angry insects defending their hive. But impressive and effective were two very different things, as Colonel Ben Hayes was about to demonstrate. His target was Arcturus Station, the Council's primary shipyard, where new vessels were constructed and old ones repaired. The station was defended by over 50 Council ships and protected by energy shields that could supposedly withstand the combined firepower of an entire fleet. Ben's force consisted of exactly 12 human vessels. They approached the station in a formation that looked almost casual compared to the rigid battle lines the Council expected. When the station commander demanded their surrender, Ben's response was broadcast across the galaxy, so everyone could hear what humanity thought of Council authority. "Negative on the surrender. We're here to work." The battle began when the Council defenders opened fire with weapons designed to disable rather than destroy. Brilliant energy beams lanced out toward the human ships, expecting to overload their systems and force them to surrender. Instead, the human vessels absorbed the impacts on armor plating that had been specifically designed to resist exactly those weapons. Ben had studied Council military doctrine for years and knew their preference for capture over kill. The human response was devastating in its simplicity. Rather than trying to disable the larger Council force, they focused all their firepower on destroying it completely. Missiles streaked through space-carrying warheads that could crack a moon in half. Energy weapons that had been perfected through centuries of human warfare cut through Council shields like they were made of paper. The Council ships tried to respond, but their weapons were designed for peacekeeping, not warfare. Their crews had trained for decades to patrol trade routes and break up minor disputes between merchant vessels. They had never faced an enemy that wanted to kill them and had the tools to do it efficiently. Within an hour, Arcturus Station was an expanding cloud of debris and molten metal. The 50 defending ships had been reduced to 12 heavily damaged, hulks trying desperately to escape the system. Ben Hayes broadcast his after-action report with the same professional calm he might use to describe a training exercise. Station destroyed, minimal resistance encountered. Moving to secondary objectives. The psychological impact of the victory rippled through Council space faster than the news itself. For the first time in millennia, a Council stronghold had been completely destroyed by an enemy force. The impossible had become reality, and every species in the galaxy was forced to confront what that meant. General Kate Sullivan commanded the overall human war effort from a mobile command ship that stayed in constant motion between star systems. Her strategy was elegantly simple and absolutely ruthless. Rather than trying to match the Council's numerical advantage, she would use humanity's superior coordination and intelligence to prevent that advantage from being brought to bear. Human ships appeared where the Council least expected them, using hyperspace routes that had been mapped over decades of secret exploration. They struck at supply convoys and communication networks rather than engaging in the massive fleet battles the Council was prepared for. Most importantly, they exploited the fundamental weakness in the Council's military structure. The 12-member species had their own fleets and their own tactical doctrines and their own ideas about how wars should be fought. The Sorok believed in pack-hunting tactics where multiple ships would surround and overwhelm individual enemies. The Zephyrians relied on harmonic coordination that allowed their crystal ships to act as a single organism. The insectoid Veltorans used swarm attacks with hundreds of small fighters. These tactics had worked well against pirates and rebels, who fought with similar methods. Against humans who had studied each species' strengths and weaknesses for 50 years, they became liabilities that could be exploited with surgical precision. Dr. Noah Peterson led humanity's technology division from research facilities scattered across hidden colonies. While the Council had assumed human technology was inferior to their own, Noah's teams had been reverse engineering alien devices and improving upon them for decades. The results were ships that combined the best features of every Council species while adding innovations the aliens had never considered. Human vessels moved faster than Sorok hunters and hit harder than Valtoran swarms. Their defensive systems were more efficient than Zephyrian crystals, and their sensors were more accurate than anything the Council had developed. Most importantly, they were crewed by humans who understood that in real warfare, second place meant death. Captain Sophie Williams pioneered the psychological warfare campaign that may have been even more effective than the military one. Her broadcasts targeted each species' cultural fears and historical grievances using information gathered through decades of anthropological study. She reminded the Sorok that the Council had forced them to abandon their warrior traditions. She pointed out to the Zephyrians that their harmonic culture was being suppressed by Council standardization policies. The carefully maintained unity between Council species began to fracture as old rivalries and resentments surfaced. Ships that should have been working together started arguing over tactics and objectives. Some species began withdrawing their forces to protect their home systems, rather than supporting joint operations. The breaking point came during the Battle of the Meridian Nebula, where Commander Rick Johnson demonstrated the most terrifying aspect of human warfare. His small squadron had been surrounded by a Council fleet that outnumbered them 20-1. The alien commanders expected him to surrender and expected to add his ships to their growing collection of captured human vessels. Instead, Rick Johnson ordered his flagship to ram the Council command vessel at maximum velocity. The collision destroyed both ships instantly and left the Council fleet without coordination or leadership. In the confusion that followed, the remaining human vessels escaped while inflicting heavy casualties on their pursuers. The willingness to die rather than surrender shocked every Council species. They valued preservation of life above all other considerations and could not comprehend beings who would choose death over defeat. The psychological impact was devastating because it meant humans could not be intimidated or coerced through normal methods. More importantly, it demonstrated that humanity was not fighting for territory or resources or political advantage. They were fighting for something the Council had never encountered before in 10,000 years of galactic history. They were fighting for the right to remain free even if freedom meant death. As reports of human victories poured in from across the galaxy, the Council began to understand they were not facing a normal military campaign. This was not a dispute over trade routes or territorial boundaries that could be resolved through negotiation and compromise. This was a war against a species that had made war itself their specialty and who would rather die than submit to alien authority. The humans had spent centuries preparing for this moment, and every tactical decision reflected that preparation. They knew where to strike and when to retreat and how to turn the Council's greatest strengths into fatal weaknesses. Most terrifying of all, they seemed to be enjoying themselves in a way that no civilized species should ever enjoy: violence. The galaxy Council was discovering that their 10,000 years of peace had been built on the assumption that all intelligent species shared their values and goals. Humanity was proving that assumption catastrophically wrong, and the cost of that mistake was being measured in destroyed fleets and shattered worlds across the galaxy. The cracks in the Galaxy Council's unity had started as hairline fractures but were rapidly becoming gaping chasms that threatened to tear apart 10 millennia of carefully maintained peace. What had begun as a war against humanity was transforming into something far more dangerous for the established galactic order. The Council was discovering that their alliance had been held together more by habit and fear than by genuine cooperation. War Chief Grunter paced the bridge of his flagship like a caged predator. His scales shifted through angry shades of red and orange as he reviewed the latest battle reports. The Sorok had always been the Council's most effective military force, but their pack-hunting tactics were proving useless against human formations that seemed to anticipate every move. Worse yet, the other Council species were interfering with Sorok operations by insisting on joint command structures that slowed decision-making to a crawl. "We should be fighting like warriors, not like bureaucrats," Grunter snarled to his assembled war leaders. "The humans understand strength. They respect courage. But these crystal singers and nettle crawlers want to hold committee meetings while battles are being lost." The Sorok withdrawal from joint operations sent shock waves through the Council command structure. For centuries, the reptilian warriors had been the backbone of galactic peacekeeping forces. Their decision to pursue independent military campaigns left huge gaps in Council defensive lines that human forces were quick to exploit. Meanwhile, in the crystalline cities of the Zephyrian homeworld, the Harmonic Councils were reaching their own troubling conclusions. Engineer Tim Roberts had developed electronic warfare systems that could disrupt their species' natural communication frequencies. During the Battle of Kepler Station, Zephyrian ships had been reduced to individual units unable to coordinate their actions or even communicate with each other. The effect on Zephyrian psychology was devastating. Their entire culture was based on harmonic unity and shared consciousness. Being cut off from their collective voice was like being struck deaf and blind simultaneously. Several Zephyrian captains had suffered complete mental breakdowns when their ships were isolated by human jamming systems. "We cannot fight an enemy that attacks our very nature," sang the prime harmonic in frequencies that resonated through crystal chambers across their world. "Perhaps it is time to consider whether this war serves our interests or merely the Council's pride." The aquatic hydran species had reached similar conclusions through their own cold logic. Their homeworld was thousands of light years from the primary conflict zones, and their contributions to the war effort were mainly logistical. Ambassador Dalmar had been calculating the costs and benefits of continued participation in what appeared to be a losing conflict. "We are spending our resources to defend a system that has never truly benefited our people," Dalmar argued before the Hydran Assembly. "The humans have made no threats against our territories. Why should we sacrifice our ships and crews for the Council's stubborn refusal to negotiate? Admiral Lavara Mitchell was monitoring these political developments from her command ship deep in human space. Her intelligence networks had been tracking Council communications for months, and the intercepted transmissions painted a clear picture of an alliance in collapse. Lavra had spent years studying military history and recognized the signs of an enemy coalition falling apart under pressure. Her response was to accelerate that collapse through targeted strikes against Council communication networks and supply lines. Rather than engaging in the massive fleet battles the aliens expected, she ordered her forces to cut the logistical connections between member species. Ships that had relied on unified supply chains suddenly found themselves operating independently. With whatever resources they could scrounge from their home systems, the strategy was working better than even Lavra had dared hope. Council fleets that should have been coordinating their efforts were instead competing for limited supplies and fuel. Some species began hoarding resources for their own use rather than sharing them with allies who might not even be allies much. Captain Joe Martinez commanded the strike force that captured the Council's primary intelligence facility in the Vega system. The station contained decades of classified communications between member species, including secret agreements and hidden negotiations that had never been revealed to the general galactic population. Joe's decision to broadcast these documents openly was perhaps the most devastating blow the Council had yet received. The revelations were shocking even by the standards of galactic politics. The Council had been playing favorites for centuries, granting special privileges to some species while imposing harsh restrictions on others. Trade agreements had been manipulated to benefit Council leadership at the expense of member worlds. Most damaging of all, several species had been secretly planning to abandon the Alliance years before the human conflict began. Dr. Amy Foster analyzed the captured intelligence data from her research station in the outer colonies. Her background in political science and xenopsychology allowed her to understand the full implications of what Joe's forces had discovered. The Galaxy Council was not the unified democratic institution it pretended to be, but rather a complex web of competing interests held together by mutual blackmail and shared fear. The Council's peace was never based on genuine cooperation, Amy explained in her analysis that was broadcast throughout human space. It was a protection racket where stronger species extracted tribute from weaker ones in exchange for security against manufactured threats. The member species stayed together because they were afraid of what might happen if they left, not because they believed in the system. The truth about Council politics spread rapidly through both human and alien communication networks. Species that had accepted centuries of exploitation began questioning why they had ever joined the Alliance. Worlds that had been forced to pay tribute to Council coffers started wondering what would happen if they simply stopped making payments. The Veltoran insectoids had always considered themselves the Council's most loyal military supporters, but even their faith was being tested by repeated defeats. Major Steve Clark's forces had developed tactics specifically designed to disrupt insect swarm formations using concentrated firepower and electronic countermeasures. The Veltorans were discovering that their numerical advantages meant nothing against enemies who could predict and counter their attack patterns. Queen Zixara received reports from her military commanders with growing alarm. The humans were not just defeating Veltoran forces, but were doing so in ways that seemed almost insulting. They would allow swarm attacks to develop fully before striking at exactly the right moment to cause maximum casualties and confusion. It was as if they were teaching the insects that their ancient tactics were obsolete. "They fight us as if we are mere animals," buzzed Commander Ticklin after his latest defeat. "They show no respect for our warrior traditions or our sacrifice. Perhaps it is time to consider whether the Council truly values our contributions." Secret communications began flowing between member species as each group considered their options. In private, some were exploring the possibility of separate peace agreements with humanity. Others were discussing the formation of new alliances that would exclude the current Council leadership. All of them were questioning whether the galactic order they had supported for millennia was worth preserving. President Helen Torres observed these developments from the hidden human capital world that had never appeared on any council star charts. Her administration had been preparing for this moment since the war began, knowing that military victory would be meaningless without political transformation. The humans were not just trying to defeat the council, but to replace it with something better. Helen's offer was as simple as it was revolutionary. Humanity would negotiate separately with each species rather than dealing with the council as a whole. Any world or government that wanted peace could have it immediately in exchange for recognition of human independence and basic cooperation agreements. There would be no tribute payments or forced compliance with alien political systems. The offer terrified the council leadership because it threatened to dissolve their authority completely. If member species could make separate deals with humanity, then the council would become irrelevant overnight. But the alternative was continuing a war they were clearly losing against an enemy that seemed to grow stronger with each passing day as more species began reaching out through diplomatic back channels. The council's military situation continued to deteriorate. Ships that should have been working together were instead protecting their own territories. Species that had once shared intelligence and resources were now hoarding both for their own use. The unified command structure that had coordinated galactic peacekeeping for centuries was fragmenting into a dozen separate military forces with incompatible goals and strategies. The humans had achieved something that 10,000 years of galactic warfare had never accomplished. They had not just defeated the council militarily, but had exposed the fundamental weaknesses in the alliance that held the galaxy together. The choice facing every species was no longer whether to support the council against humanity, but whether the council was worth supporting. The end came not with a massive space battle or dramatic final confrontation, but with a simple announcement broadcast from the Sorok homeworld. War Chief Groner stood before the assembled warriors of his clan and spoke words that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. The Sorok people withdraw from the Galaxy Council effective immediately. We pledge our loyalty to the Terran Federation and offer our claws in service of true warriors who understand the value of strength and honor. The declaration sent shockwaves through what remained of the Council alliance. The Sorok had been their most reliable military force for over 3,000 years. Their withdrawal meant that half the Council's effective combat strength had just switched sides in a war they were already losing. But more than that, it meant the alliance that had held the galaxy together for 10 millennia was finally dissolving. Within hours, similar announcements began coming from other worlds. The Hydran Assembly voted to accept humanity's offer of separate peace in exchange for logistical support agreements. The crystalline Zephyrians opened negotiations for a research partnership that would enhance their harmonic abilities using human technology. Even some of the smaller council species began reaching out through diplomatic channels to explore their options in a galaxy without council authority. Captain Don Wilson oversaw the integration of alien vessels into human battle groups from his command ship in the Centauri system. The process was surprisingly smooth once the species involved stopped trying to maintain council protocols and started focusing on practical cooperation. Sorok hunters provided reconnaissance and rapid strike capabilities that complemented human heavy weapons. Hydran supply ships extended the operational range of human fleets far beyond what either species could achieve alone. The military advantages were obvious, but the psychological impact was even more significant. For the first time in galactic history, species were choosing to work with humans as equals rather than submitting to a hierarchical system that placed them in predetermined roles. The voluntary nature of these alliances made them stronger and more flexible than anything the Council had ever created. Dr. Kelly Adams led the research teams that were revolutionizing Zephyrian communication technology. Instead of disrupting their harmonic frequencies, human scientists had found ways to amplify and enhance them. Zephyrian ships equipped with human-designed harmonic boosters could coordinate across vast distances with perfect precision. The crystalline beings discovered that human creativity could improve their natural abilities in ways they had never imagined possible. "We spent centuries accepting limitations imposed by council regulations," sang the Prime Harmonic during the first successful test of the enhanced communication systems. "These humans show us that growth and improvement are always possible for those willing to embrace change." The final battle of the war took place at Centrum Prime, the heavily fortified world that served as the Council's ultimate stronghold. General Paul Rogers commanded the combined human and alien fleet that surrounded the planet in a display of overwhelming force. The ships represented a dozen different species, but they moved with unified purpose under human tactical coordination. The defenders of Centrum Prime were the last holdouts of the old order. Die-hard Council loyalists who would rather fight to the death than accept the end of their galactic authority. They had powerful orbital defense systems and the desperate courage of beings with nothing left to lose. But they were also outnumbered, 10-1 by forces that included many of their former allies. The battle was swift and decisive. Council defensive systems that had been designed to repel conventional attacks were overwhelmed by the combined firepower of species working together under integrated command structures. Former Council warships fought alongside human vessels using tactics that had been developed through months of joint training and cooperation. When the planetary shields finally collapsed, General Rogers received a transmission from the Council's last stronghold. Chairman Veltara's compound eyes reflected the fires burning in his capital city as he spoke words that officially ended 10,000 years of galactic government. The Galaxy Council formally surrenders to human forces. We acknowledge the authority of the Terran Federation and request terms for the peaceful transition of government functions. The message was broadcast across the galaxy on all frequencies so that every world and every species could hear the end of the old order. But Paul Rogers' response was not the harsh victory declaration many expected. Instead, he simply said that humanity was ready to discuss the future with anyone interested in building something better than what had come before. President Helen Torres addressed the galaxy from the newly revealed human capital world that had been hidden from Council surveillance for over a century. Her words were translated into hundreds of languages and broadcast to billions of beings who were suddenly free to choose their own destinies for the first time in millennia. The Terran Federation offers partnership, not domination. We invite every species and every world to join us in creating a galactic community based on voluntary cooperation and mutual respect. There will be no tribute payments or forced compliance. No species will be required to abandon their culture or accept limitations on their development. The only requirement is respect for the basic rights of all sentient beings. The response was overwhelming. Worlds that had been suppressed under Council rule began developing new technologies and exploring cultural expressions that had been forbidden for centuries. Species that had been forced into rigid caste systems started experimenting with different forms of government and social organization. The galaxy was experiencing a renaissance of creativity and innovation that had been impossible under Council restrictions. Commander Ashley Brown established the first integrated fleet academy on a neutral world where officers from different species could train together using human military doctrine adapted for alien capabilities. The graduates of these programs would become the backbone of a new kind of military force, one that existed to protect freedom rather than enforce compliance. The classes were taught in multiple languages and adapted to different physiologies, but the core principles were purely human. Initiative and adaptability were valued over rigid adherence to protocol. Junior officers were encouraged to think independently and challenge authority when necessary. Most importantly, the curriculum emphasized that military power existed to serve civilian government, not to control it. The transformation was not limited to military affairs. Trade networks that had been controlled by Council bureaucrats were replaced by direct agreements between species and worlds. Scientific research that had been restricted to approved topics began exploring new frontiers that had been off-limits for millennia. Cultural exchange flourished as species discovered they could learn from each other without losing their own identities. Jake Morrison returned to the Galaxy Council Station one final time. The massive structure was being converted from a government facility into a museum and cultural center where future generations could learn about both the achievements and failures of the old order. The chamber where he had spoken his impossible word was being preserved exactly as it had been on that historic day, standing in the same spot where he had defied the most powerful organization in the galaxy. Jake reflected on how much had changed. The 12 massive seats that had once held alien rulers were now occupied by holographic displays showing the diverse governments and cultures that made up the new galactic community. The Terran Federation had become not a replacement for the Council, but a coordinator that helped different species work together while maintaining their independence. The transformation was not complete and might never be complete. There were still species that preferred isolation to cooperation and worlds that struggled with the freedom to make their own choices. Some systems had descended into chaos when Council authority disappeared, while others had flourished beyond all expectations. But for the first time in galactic history, the choice was theirs to make. The humans had kept their promise made in that first impossible moment of defiance. They had chosen conflict over false peace, and in doing so had given the galaxy something it had never truly possessed before. They had given it freedom, the freedom to succeed or fail, the freedom to grow and change and become something better. Most importantly, the freedom to choose their own destiny among the stars. The galaxy, Council's greatest fear, had become reality. Humanity had not just rejected diplomacy, but had proven that sometimes conflict was necessary to achieve genuine peace. Their choice had liberated not just themselves, but an entire galaxy from a system that had confused order with justice and compliance with cooperation. The new galactic community would face challenges and uncertainties, but it would face them as free peoples working together by choice rather than compulsion.